Well, thank you, Rob. Very brave of your pastor to invite me, and Rob to invite me to speak today, because the other thing that Rob didn't tell you, why I'm an architect, it's brave enough to invite an architect to speak from your pulpit, but I'm also a Baptist. And you give a Baptist a pulpit, and, you did say something about 10 minutes, but I don't know. It could go on a lot longer. The other thing I wanted to mention before I start is this whole process is a team effort, a team effort in working with you, but also the drawings you're going to see and what we talk about is the work of a team. And Isabella Priddle has been fundamental in this process as well. She's my colleague and works with me at Hobin Architecture. So, and unfortunately, she's not staying with us because she feels the need to go on and get her master's degree. And anyway, unfortunately, she's going to go away, but she'll come back. And so let's start with the first slide. And so there's pictures of the storm. There's Arlington Woods, the community. There's your fellowship hall. And that storm was devastating, not just to your building, not just to the community, but it did a lot of damage overall. It goes beyond it. And I remember I was driving from a meeting back to the office, and I was listening to CBC radio, and there was this interview with your pastor, and talking about how the storm, what it had done to the building and to the community, but not only that, but how this church had bridged that storm. It had become a center for people coming for relief. There was where food was being provided because people's fridges didn't work and their houses didn't have power, and this place had become a center. And so the storm broke down trees and ripped off roofs, but also broke down barriers between this church and its community. That's really, really important. And so when we were asked to come and submit a proposal to help you overcome the damages that have been done by the storm, it struck us as being also an opportunity to build on this connection that had gone on with the community. People don't go to church anymore. You go to church, but you know this. This is part of your life. But out there's a whole generation that's never been to church, and they live around you. And so this bridge, this connection that brought people in, it was vital. And how do you maintain that? How do you use this as an opportunity to continue that opening, breaking down of barriers? The church, this building, is essentially a tool for ministry. That's how I look at it. It's a tool for ministry. We come here to worship, but it's also all of these rooms and spaces are tools for living out our ministry in the community, amongst each other, in service. And if you think about it as being like a house, a traditional house, there's the street, which is the public sector. There's the front yard, which is semi-public. There's the veranda or front porch, which is semi-private. And then in your house is your living room where you're entertaining your guests. And once you get to know somebody really well, you invite them into the kitchen. They become part of your family. So if the church is like that, if we could make the church like that, where we can reach out to the community, because they don't want to come into here. It's too intimate. It's too hard to get to here right from the outside. But how does the church get a veranda? How do we have a front yard where we can engage the community and welcome them there without the threatening or the fear of the unknown about what goes on in here? So that was what we started to think about when we walked around the church. And we saw the damage and we saw what could be done, but we also thought about how do we invite people in. Because if we can connect to the people around us and get them in, then we can grow them in Christ, and then they can serve. connect, grow, serve. Can I see the next slide, please? So we started wandering around looking at the building, and from an outsider, for me, it was confusing. You're used to it. But when we come into the building, let me see if I can do this without blinding anybody. Later. Can you see that at all? Probably not. Okay, so this is the ground floor plan. Here's the sanctuary where we are right now. The street is out here. And one of the first things we noticed is that, the main entrance is off the side. That's where all of you come in. But from the street, the visibility of the entrance is pretty low key. It's understated. And there's just like a little narrow sidewalk that leads up to it. The front of the building is pretty well opaque. There's hardly any windows. People going by can't see what's going on inside. When something interesting is happening here, no one knows, they can't see it. And a principal area, one of the most important prime locations on the ground floor, is taken up with coat storage rooms. And that seemed like an unfortunate barrier to connecting with the people outside. The foyer is dark and not really connected to the outside. There's no daylight. There's very little synergy for it. It could be a lot more dynamic. Next slide, please. So when we look at the basement, it's really confusing to me. You come down the stairs, you can go one way into the Sunday school area, you go another way down a dark corridor to the youth area, and the nursery is buried in another area with very few windows. So again, no access to daylight, confusing to a visitor, because visitors want to know where they're going to leave their kids, and this is all important stuff. Next slide, please. So we started to look at the site. Here's the site plan as it exists now with a few things that we started to notice. There's a multi-use pathway that belongs to the city that cuts across your property, but there's very little connection between the church and this asset, which is like your front yard. And it could be used in a variety of ways for ministry. So how do we connect to that piece of front yard? And it used to be, this whole side of the church used to be really invisible. Now all those trees have been ripped out. Now that side of the church has a lot of visibility, but it doesn't look like much. And here's our front yard with its a porch that we don't really use. And so how do we make this more welcoming? Next slide, please. So this floor plan is the ground floor plan, and it shows, it's probably hard for you to see it there, but it shows some ideas that we've got as a master plan for this ground floor. So we open up the front. We reduce the amount of coat storage area, cloakroom, to just one space. When you go to a movie, you don't ever leave your coat behind. You just take it in with you. So why do we feel that when we go to a church, that we have to leave the coat in a cloakroom? And I don't know that it's necessary. I was the architect for Woodvale Pentecostal Church, and it seats 1,900 people. There's no way that we can have a cloakroom for all 1,900 coats. So people take their coats in with them. It's only on medium-sized and smaller churches that we feel we have to provide cloakrooms. And I think this is prime real estate right here. So the first thing we have as a notion is we come into a foyer or a lobby, and we open up views to bring lots of daylight in, both so that it's bright and sunny in that space, but also so that people from the outside can see the activity that's going on inside. So from the foyer, immediately towards the front, we create a cafe. And the cafe is an interesting idea, and it's a place where on a Sunday morning, a visitor can come and can be offered coffee, and they have to be served. Not that they serve themselves. This is the old way the churches always do it. They have to be served. So Isabella could be serving coffee that day. She's like a server in a Starbucks, and gets this opportunity to give someone a cup of coffee and talk to them. Talk to them for maybe 15 seconds or 20 seconds while that cup of coffee is being made. It might take a minute. And so that's one more opportunity for engagement with a person in this in-between area. During the week, the cafe can also be used for when you've got kids programs that are going on, and Rob's come with his children at some evening program or afternoon program, and he can sit in the cafe and visit with Pastor Mike or with another person who it's his first time. His kids are just starting to come, and so you get more engagement. Or the youth use it for a small group, or seniors use it for a small group, and it's visible. You can spill out onto the porch where there would be tables and use this area in a way that's completely different from what it is now. Also, I'm taking way more than my 10 minutes. Over to this side is the fellowship hall. And so we've proposed just opening that wall right up, wide open, with big barn doors that would be glazed so that you can, when you're standing in the foyer, you see right into it. And on the other side of that space would be, we'd knock a hole in the wall and create a big window so that you look right out with views to the parkland beyond, and people on the multi-use pathway can see the activities that are going on in your space. And so on a Sunday morning, after worship, when people are coming out, spilling out of the sanctuary, these doors would be pulled aside and you could just flow into here for coffee time. Or if you're having a church dinner, the church dinner could expand out into this lobby if we needed more space. If you're holding an event, it just all spills together. All of these things work together. At the same time, we're doing some very basic fundamental improvements, changing the front entrance to be wide enough with double doors so that we can open it right wide open and there's no pillar in between, so that we can carry a casket through, we can take a wedding party through, or lots of people can come in together or pass out together. Same thing in the front. And we'll be air conditioning that space. Next slide, please. So this is the first phase of the basement plan. Very minimal work going on here. We would be taking, up above, we'd be taking that stage out of the fellowship hall and replacing the whole ceiling at this lower level, and also opening up this wall to the view to that piece of yard at the side. So it would be possible, if I'm using this space for youth, to open up the doors and get directly out into this area, and to invite people in that way from that side as well. Next slide. But looking ahead as another future phase, reorganizing the whole basement so that, not radically different, but just enough to make a difference so that there's one clear, wide circulation space where we come downstairs for children's program. There would be room in here. This is like 8 feet across. There'd be room in here for people to gather, to have a reception counter right here, to check your children into the children's program in here, or check your children into the nursery program over here, or off to the youth program. And this would be a glass wall which brings light in. And so the moment I come out of the stairs, I have a view to outside. And so that's part of that vision as well. Next slide, please. So that's a shot, a drawing that Isabella created of the front of the church. This shows the existing porch, but opened up with a lot more glazing and a bigger walkway to this more welcoming. And you can try to squint and imagine how you would use that porch. Maybe there's umbrellas and colorful accents to make it like an inviting place. It could be changed and use it in a variety of ways. Next slide, please. This is the view from the side. Here's the fellowship hall with the new window on the side opening up onto the park, much more visible now that the trees are gone, bringing lots of daylight in, plus people can see what's going on. Next slide, please. Here's a view from inside the foyer looking towards the fellowship hall. So this is the big barn doors are gathered here. So there's 2 of them. There's a gang of them there. They're big glass doors. And they can close right up for acoustics if we need it. This would be like a reception counter. So if we're having, on a Sunday morning where visitors come, that's where they would get their information about the church. But they can also, we can just spill into this room. And the nature of that room is, I think, about fellowship first and sports second, as opposed to a gym, which is about sports first and fellowship second. And next slide, please. This is looking off towards the front of the building, and this would be the cafe. So a little serving. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. It's a cafe. And, these posts have to stay here. We would make it an attractive open space with lots of daylight. Next slide, please. This is inside the cafe with some monitors on the wall so that we can have announcements telling about the programs of the church and about the countdown to when it's time to come in for worship. Next slide, please. fellowship hall with the stage removed, storage room at the end, basketball hoop that can be folded up against the wall, and these big windows. Next slide. And there's the view from the outside, from a little closer up, with you get a sense of what people would see when this is like a lantern at night or in the afternoon. Next slide, please. And there's the collection of all those images together. So that's just a very quick snapshot. And I'll be out in the foyer after if you want to ask some questions or have a closer look at the drawings. We have drawings on boards so that you can look at it.